Hello? Okay. Sorry. Hello, sorry, I completely got lost on the way here. This is my first time. I'm in the morning section. So for you, those of you who don't know about me, I'm Ying Kun Ho. I'm from China. And I study food, and I'll talk more about it throughout this lecture. And we're going to be talking about food, culture, and society. How many of you have read the reading? Okay, pretty good. Thank you. Hopefully you will, if you haven't read it, the lecture will help you to figure it out more and find it more interesting to read. So the structure is we're gonna start by the textbook readings. Wow, this is really annoying. So we'll talk about the foodways and the subsistence strategies, the mode of subsistence, and a lot of the concept, don't worry about taking notes of it. It's all in your textbook. I'll just highlight some of the important parts so you can pay more attention to the interesting part. And then we'll talk about the food, culture, and meaning. Sorry, I think I did this upside down. And as examples, we'll talk about the 3 readings we read today. We'll get there. So to begin, I will let you all watch a clip that I took from Wild China. It's a documentary made by BBC. It talks a lot of interesting things about China, but this part in particular, we'll talk about the cultivation of rice, which is pretty relevant to our topic today. And while you're watching, keep in mind how human had developed strategies to interact with the nature environment that they live in and how that affects how they get food.
China is a vast area, 8 times larger than the UK. It's a landscape of hills, but also of water. It rains here for up to 250 days a year, and standing water is everywhere. In the floodplain of the Yangtze River, black-tailed godwits probe the mud in search of worms. But it isn't just wildlife that thrives in this environment. The swampy ground provides ideal conditions for a remarkable member of the grass family: rice. The Chinese have been cultivating rice for at least 8,000 years. It has transformed the landscape. Late winter in southern Yunnan is a busy time for local farmers as they prepare the age-old paddy fields ready for the coming spring. These hill slopes of Wenyang County plunge nearly 2,000 meters to the floor of the Red River Valley. Each contains literally thousands of stacked terraces carved out by hand using basic digging tools. Yunnan's rice terraces are among the oldest human structures in China, still plowed, as they always have been, by domesticated water buffaloes, whose ancestors originated in these very valleys. This man-made landscape is one of the most amazing engineering feats of pre-industrial China. It seems as if every square inch of land has been pressed into cultivation.
Okay, so here are our dry concepts that you'll find in the textbook, so don't worry about taking notes too much. These are the 4 strategies that we will talk about of modes of subsistence, how people interact with the environment to gain food. And which one of the 4 do you think what we see in the clip belongs to? Exactly, thank you very much. Yes, it is intensive agriculture. And we'll go in detail about each one of them. But make sure you know the concept, what food waves mean and what the modes of subsistence mean. Usually people combine different strategies. We don't always just do one. So first of all, let's look at foraging. It basically means that you chase the environment, you gather food directly from the environment. So it also calls hunting and gathering. This is a mobile lifestyle because instead of accumulating food, having a sedentary life, you go around, gather food. So you're going to chase the food, which makes sense because it makes sense to have a smaller population in this mode because there's a limited production of the environment and you have to move around. You can't carry a lot of possessions with you. So people usually are not it's usually not a big crowd population in the community. And as remember, we talked about last week, Talia explained to us about the Stonehenge economy and the Zen road to remember. So, okay, there's this common misconception that we think people who are hunter and gatherers or foragers are suffering because they're struggling, they're starving, and because of our modern concept of infinite wants, right? But our study, some anthropologists studied this, the exclamation point stands for a sound in their language. I'm not very good at it, but Kosan, they are a modern day foraging group of people where it's pretty difficult, the environment, they can't do agriculture or horticulture. So they go around and gathering food. And they actually only works less than 20 hours per week to gather food. I don't know about you all. We don't work directly to make food, to gather food every day, but we do work. Like, for example, I'm working so that I have enough resources to get food, and I work definitely more than 20 hours per week. So actually they have a lot of luxury to enjoy and be relaxed. And also think about the environment. This is a picture that I took from a website. If you're interested, you can check it out. They explain the cycle of the seasons and how and what you can get from your environment. And it actually requires a lot of knowledge about the environment, a lot of skills. Have you ever go out into the woods and just try to find something to feed on? You know, don't try mushrooms because they're pretty bad, will make you delusional or potentially kill you. I would never try it myself. And they have very little impact on the environment as compared to the rest of the different modes of subsistence. And keep in mind, 99% of our history, we are foragers. This modern strategy of gathering food is only very recent. The next one is horticulture, which means that people usually provide for their household with a small piece of land. So it's not for reinvestment like we will talk about with the intensive agriculture. And the technology and the tools they use are usually simpler. It emerged about 12,000 years ago when people started to know how to domestic certain animals and plants. Remember in the clip, they talk about rice was a grass. A lot of the plants we use, they're wild plants. We just selectively breeded them so that they produce more food. And as we gain more control of this plants and animals, we started to be able to have this sedentary life where people don't move as much, and you have more availability of food to provide for a household or maybe sometimes a community. So this one in the picture, does anyone know what this is called? Yes, please. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, slash and burn. So as you can imagine, you burn a small piece of the forest to release the nutrients to the soil, and then you grow crops on it that produces a good amount of food to feed you and your family. This is also called swindle agriculture. And in this way, we started to have a more of an impact on the environment. However, it is still much less than intensive agriculture because people still have a really good knowledge about the environment. They knew if you keep growing, keep burning, the soil would not provide anything. You would leave and go to a different place. So even though you're sedentary a little bit more as compared to foragers, but you still move once in a while. And depending on the scenario, you may not come back for a couple of decades. So the soil can have time to recover. And the next one is pastoralism, where it talks about you may have read about in the Middle East where the environment is really dry, people rely on their cattle, or it could be any animals that like you can herd, like camel, which is very important. People still do it today in some areas where you can't even drive because it's so hot, the tire would actually melt on the desert. They would use camel to transport salt and some important stuff. In this case, because you rely on the animals, you don't want to kill them. You're not gonna slaughter them regularly just to feed on the meat. They are very important properties. You can think of them as your vehicles and machines that produce food. So people feed on dairy products, they make butter, cream, or all types of things. And they also take advantage of the hair, animal hair, and they use it to pull, to transport stuff. They still have to move constantly because the cattle or whatever animals you raise, they could do some damage to the vegetations on the land. So keep in mind of the environment. We're going to talk more next lecture with Andrea. So some of the goats in China that I know, they would eat the root of the grass. So it could be actually really bad and cause desertification and all that stuff. So there has to be certain social organizations around this type of lifestyle mode of subsistence so that you make sure redistribute, which goes back to the economic strategies we talked about, redistribute the herd resources, make sure you use sustainably on the land. But whenever you do it successfully, it's actually quite sustainable mode of subsistence as well. So here are some pictures. I don't know where this one was taken, but I think it gives you a visual about the lifestyle that this type of food gathering, food acquiring strategy has. You have to build temporary tents as you're moving a lot, and you can't have too incredibly much possessions because you have to move around. And you can see in the far away some of the herd animals. And this is one you can search online called Basari. I may not pronounce it correctly. This is their traditional tribal road that they travel quite often. It's 300 miles long. You can imagine it would be very hard as in just one family to travel through. So you have to rely on the entire community to go through and do that. And the next one is, I think it's from National Geography. It's just people herding sheep. So you can see horse in this type of scenario is very important. They have a large herd group of sheep, goat in this case. So your horse is kind of like the vehicle. It's very, very important. And sometimes the grazing on the land may help the biodiversity of the native plants. And it could actually be helpful for the environment to recuperate. And occasionally people do kill their animals, usually for ritualistic reasons, ceremonial reasons. But in that case, they will make sure they'll take advantage of every single resources that the animal provide. And this would go to later topics. Has anyone eaten any blood product? You have, okay. Okay, yes, yeah, it's pretty common in a lot of places. You want to take advantage of it, and there's a lot of nutrients in it. And then you can say the waste is going to be used for fuel or whatever makes sense for the people at the time. The last one we'll talk about the mode of subsistence is intensive agriculture, which is most of us how we get most of our food for the past couple thousands of years. But keep in mind, this is not the only way. Some of y'all may have gardens at home, you may occasionally go out hunting and stuff, so it's not the only way. And in this scenario, we intensify how we interact, how we extract resources from the environment. So it greatly changes the environment through like plow, irrigation, and that, remember you see in the video clip, they completely transform the mountain. And imagine the impact on the environment and the technology you needed or the labor you need to amass in that case of scenario. So definitely it has some very important benefits, because otherwise we wouldn't be using it, right? So it provided a lot more reliable food for a larger group of people. You can have a dense population. You will definitely have a stable variety of food provided to you. But as you can imagine, because we have done so much to change the environment, there may cause a lot of problems like water table lowering, erosion, and concentration of salt. So that's something we need to keep in mind. And intensive agriculture, like what we see in the video, is pre-industrial intensive agriculture. But nowadays, you and I, we rely on the industrial level, or you can call it large-scale commercialized agriculture, where there are very specialized fields and a lot of the product and the process is commercialized, commoditized. You would have to buy the seeds as commodity instead of making it your own. And we heavily rely on machines and other technologies. One other issue with that, other than the environment, is that there's also an overproduction that kind of ties into our capitalistic structure of our society. So next, we'll talk about food and meaning. So food waste not only including the production, but also include the consuming aspect of how we structure our beliefs and how we use food. So here's things, well, particularly because I'm late, I prepared a joke, and make sure you laugh at the end of it. So there is a Mexican, this is stereotypical, so keep in mind, a Mexican, American, a German, and a Dutch walks into a bar, and they're ordering beers. And the American, of course, goes first, like, give me the king of the beer, Budweiser. So they got the Budweiser. And then the Dutch was like, give me the real beer made from spring, Heineken. So they give him a Heineken. And then the Mexican says, like, oh, give me the best beer in the world, a Corona. And so they have a Corona. And then the German says, give me a Coke. And everybody was like, what? Does the German have no beers that you're proud of? And the German says, well, since none of you is drinking beer, I'll just not drink beer either. So here in this story, I know it's very stereotypical, but it shows us how we use food to draw distinction between each other. So it tells you something. As an anthropologist now, you can think, why is it funny? Why we come up with this joke. So obviously food have meanings, like a lobster. What scenario do you want to order lobster? What can you afford a lobster? Why is it a symbol? So that's something we need to think about in our preferences, our ethics, and our what is allowed, what is not allowed, the taboos, and how it tells us about our social structure, our culture. And in particularly, I want to talk a little bit about taste because that's kind of my focus. I did my bachelor's in China in food engineering college, well, university college, the subdivision that focuses on wine engineering. So we studied a lot about the scientific methods of tasting. And yes, that's definitely one aspect of it, which our textbook talks about it. But there's also a cultural aspect of it. We use taste to distinguish and show our prestige, our cultural capital. And one example I have is, I know a lot of people are pretty snobbish about tasting wine. Like, oh, I can taste this, and I can rant about it all the time. But so keep in mind as we continue talking about the other readings, but also keep in mind everything is changing. Culture is not static. The readings we read or we're reading is written a while ago, so things may have changed. So first we start with a study of everyday life. The Golden Arches East talks about McDonald's in East Asia. And I want to point out to you, the left is a Chinese translation when they publish in China, and the right one is the American cover. Remember, we read about how the textbook covers in anthropology. You can think about why the presentation of the book is different. But the book is pretty significant because McDonald was a deal. This is written in 1997. It was a big deal. The globalization kind of behind McDonald as an example of it, and people started to pay a lot of attention. There are a lot of books published about it, but none of the book really talked to the consumers about what they think about the experience of being in McDonald's, eating McDonald's. They all look at the management, the spirit of entrepreneurship. So this is what anthropological contribution really is important, that we focus on the people, the everyday life. And here are some quotes. You don't have to write it down. Just want to show you, the anthropologists, we really try to make the most out of the everyday life, to find things in details that other people don't. And that's why food is such a good medium and subject, because we all eat food. And it tells us something about our culture that otherwise could be forgotten. Or if you really want to take notes, just take the bold part, the keywords. So focus on the mundane part of the culture that can allow us to draw the correlations from the details, from the part at micro level that other people ignore, and to the grand level of like economists and political scientists. So when McDonald's was first starting to emerge in all the world, different parts of the world, and there was this fear, it's getting less, I think, but this is one I found in 2015, that people are concerned about the imperialism Big Mac brought. So it's called cultural imperialism. Well, people consider it's a form of exploitation from more powerful economic resourceful countries to other countries. They're like, oh my gosh, it's eradicating the local culture, indigenous cuisine. Well, as anthropologists, we want to see, is this really true? We need to be really careful of making generalizations and grand blanket generalization statements. So then that's why this anthropologist went in and interviewed people and sit in McDonald's and see what does McDonald's really stands for, and just trying to see the experience of everyday life from all these people. Has any of you gone to a McDonald's other than in America? Oh, quite a few. Wow. So what do you find in there? Do you find it's still very similar to American McDonald's? Yes. Right. Yes. So yes, that's very good. Thank you. So you definitely can recognize that there is a consistency in McDonald's, right? You're not going to mistake that you thought you go to Pizza Hut. It's different part of the world, but it's still McDonald's. But they have variations of the food that you may not be able to find in America. For example, which we're going to talk more about, espresso. This is what I went onto the websites of Italy, and this one is Israel, which I don't read their language, so I just took picture that I thought was interesting. But you can see the sign is a little different. The background logo color is different. And then they have espresso, which I don't think American ones have. And this is a deep fried stick Chinese breakfast and porridge. So yes, there's a level of standardization in McDonald's, but at the same time, they try to incorporate local sensitivity as well. A lot of times it's because people would reject them if they don't. So the book, I won't talk the whole chapter. I won't talk about the whole chapter, but I will just point you to some of the important things. I think it was interesting. McDonald's did manage to train the customers, like getting in the line and taking out your own trash. Those are some very interesting things they did. But at the same time, there are things that didn't work. So for example, you read the book, you see in Moscow, when McDonald's was first introduced, people have to give out flyers to those who stand in line to tell them how to eat hamburgers, because they don't know how to eat hamburgers. Then they also let them know, if you see us smiling at you or not laughing at you, we're happy to serve you. Because in their culture in Moscow, a smile could be considered a challenge. Similarly, in Hong Kong, people expect the sellers to be, or people who are helping them with business, to be focused. If you are smiling or laughing, they would be very concerned, like, you plotting something against me? So it's considered more conniving than actually friendly. So they did manage to convince the world, you should smile when you are being friendly, but it wasn't always the case. And so in the process of McDonaldization, or whatever you want to call it, going abroad and planting all these restaurants, they did manage to bring the world some of their culture, their system, but at the same time, this is a two-way street, that the local culture did change McDonald's, that they have to make adjustments, and some of the modes that they use everywhere is rejected. And what people find out is that, again, it's dynamic. It's not static things. It means different things to different people at different times in their lives. So the next article is Coffee, the Bottomless Cup. And again, I want to draw your attention to the contribution and the uniqueness of anthropology, is that we are sometimes consider ourselves professional outsiders, even though you're within your culture. Like, for example, this particular article, the author is from America, but he noticed that you can get free refill coffee. So this may be a little different from our time. Nowadays you have to be a member, you have 25 stars on the Starbucks app in order to get a free refill fresh brew coffee. Not on campus, apparently, you have to pay on campus. But why is that? So some of the diners, if you go to today, I believe they still do that. Why is that? So he asked his students, he's a professor, so he did what we would do, ask you all. And the students give very utilitarian answer, and he's very dissatisfied. It was like, well, obviously, it's more than that. I'm not going to go into details about what that is, it's the reverse case in England where they serve tea for free refills or coffee not. Going back to McDonald's, one thing I found was very strange to me is that in McDonald's in America, you can get a free refill soda, where in China, you don't. Also, if you're in airports, they don't refill your soda either. So you can think about why as anthropologists on that too. We're not going to that. But what he finds, his main finding is that the cultural, the symbolic implication of coffee is something it is embedded in American social relationship. It is a neighborly beverage, non-alcoholic drink that creates this sensation, social relation that we're neighbors. It's kind of a more casual than friends, but definitely more intimate, more closer than strangers. So the conclusion he has for this is that even though socially a stranger, you have to pay. That's, remember we talked about in the exchange economics, the bartering happens more between people you know, whereas the paying in cash, in currency is among people who are strangers because you don't know if they will hold up their end of the deal. So while going to restaurants is definitely one of those things that you don't want to, they're not gonna give you a ledger or anything. You want to pay immediately, it's done. If you see, like, you're probably too young to see Seinfeld or something, okay, so when you give your friend a gift, especially your girlfriend or boyfriend, which is the kind of the plot in the show, you don't want to give them $20, $50. Oh, go get something for yourself for this Valentine's Day and see how well that goes. So why is that? Why is it more okay for your grandparents to give you money? So you can think about that too. So the idea is that, giving gift is embedded in our social relations. It symbolizes very different things. So in the same way, your diner or the restaurant that refills your coffee wants to create this sensation that in some sense, you are still a neighbor. And in America, only coffee can create that illusion. Now, I want to point out that this is written a while ago. Things may have changed. He may have taken more roots, but this is to help you to see some of the things. This is a picture of tea drinking. So I'm going to go into tea, a little bit of my own research. So after I finished my degree in wine engineering, I went and drank a lot of wine, tasted a lot of wine, and met a lot of very snobbish people, got really tired of them, and I want to start study them more from a cultural perspective. And then I came to America, I studied craft beer. So then I got really done with alcoholic drinks because when you're studying people get drunk and it's sometimes really difficult for me. So I decided to study tea. So then this is a tea house in China that I went to. It is right across the street from American Embassy in Shenyang, and they actually get a lot of ambassadors like from North Korea and all the interesting places too. So we went in there, and it's pretty nicely decorated, and they have like a Starbucks type of thing that you pay for a pot of tea. But then they just invited us to sit down and drink tea with them. We're like, oh, we're drinking tea anyway, and it's not much trouble to give you some tea either. So they just poured us free tea. And I went to a couple of the places like that. I was like, what, can you expect to go to a coffee place and they just give you free coffee? And it's different than free refill. I spent no money in there. Well, later I feel bad at this place, I spent some money. But that's me. Like, still, if you don't have to spend money there. So my research digs a little into that. And the idea, they will even let you do the tea too. This is a picture someone took. So of me, if you can't tell, because I'm wearing masks. So the idea, I think, is that they want you to feel more like a friend. So it's even a step closer than neighbors. They want you to feel like a friend, and therefore you're not obligated. We're not strangers. We're not bound by the monetary transaction, but we're more of a friend. So the last one, as we still have a little bit of time left, is espresso, a shot of masculinity. So this is a little newer. Still probably you like quite old for you all, but it's probably not too old for me. So in this, she dives into the division of private and the public, which is a big distinction. You find a lot of this type of a distinction in our studies of culture, where the home is considered feminine, is dominated by the woman, and it's essential. So for men, especially this one she talks about in the 18th century, where coffee was introduced to England and West Europe, that coffee became a serious competitor to the taverns because, men after work, which is the public, they want to find a third place to hang out and be men and not being, contaminated by the private feminine part. And the coffee, as you're not going to be distracted by the alcoholic aspect of it, it is considered dry because of this bitter taste. So have any of you liked coffee when you were a kid before you were an adult? Not much, right? I think the bitterness kind of serves as a threshold or hindrance for that in coffee. So men can go to the third place, the coffee place, and become more men. Well, then coffee made its way into the kitchen. Women started to drink coffee too. It became more of a family thing, as we can see, in the previous article. Everybody kind of drink coffee. It's not that hard to get used to, but espresso remained to be the strong and masculine drink. So since there's so many of you, who would go to Starbucks and just order espresso? Raise your hand, please. No? No one? Okay. Does anyone like espresso, the taste of espresso? Oh, okay, but you won't just order it. Okay, yeah, so she actually did the study, and part of it, she says, is probably because it's pretty difficult to make. You have to have the machine, it's a little more complicated than just making coffee, more expensive to acquire the machine too. But the other part is that it is a very strong drink. So do you know about Americano? So supposedly, this is unaffirmed. Americano is because Americans go to Italy in World War II. Unconfirmed again, but it shows some of the points I try to make. They find espresso too hard to drink, so they added water to it. So I did that too. But espresso can maintain this sense of that it's even bitter, even more strong, even more bold. So unlike the beer and wine, now that women also drink it too, it's more like a hard liquor shot. So as you can see in George Clooney picture, it's really small. And well, can you imagine, instead of having espresso, he has this? Not a great Photoshop person, but I mean, kind of very different image there. So nonetheless, her conclusion in that eventually is that this espresso maintained this unadulterated, it's a strong drink that naturally fits a strong, hard body, which is what we associate with a man with masculinity, and particularly in America, that we want to have this image. Especially men want to have this image, which she also said when she sat in the coffee place, or there's some surveys find out men are more likely to order espresso. So maybe guys, as you get older, makes more money and hang out with older men, you would prefer more espresso. Once you do that, feel free to let me know so I have more data. So it embodies this hardworking, success-driven achiever. So to summarize, I skipped a lot of parts, but just to summarize a little bit, we talked about the modes of subsistence. Remember all the 4 things. I'm sure you'll be testing on it, and it's going to be in the textbook. And then we talked about what role that food plays in agriculture, particularly through the example of McDonald's and the refill of the coffee and espresso and masculinity. So I want to invite you, as you know, you're in this class this semester, to think more like an anthropologist. You eat food every day. Just pay attention to what you eat, what you don't want to eat. Like, has anyone eaten a durian before? Durian? Not a lot of you. It's actually really good. But you know, why don't you eat it? Why not? It takes some time to get used to. And this picture is also the fish. Like, has any of you eat a whole fish? A comfort with eating whole fish? Yes. So this is what I cooked for the Chinese New Year, traditional Chinese New Year. So just think about how you would apply what we learned in your everyday life. And lastly, happy Valentine's Day and 元宵节快乐. It's a Latin vessel. Thank you very much. Feel free to come to my office and talk to me if you have any questions or comments.
The lecture is so great. It's so
Thank you.
vivid, and then it keeps us engaged.
Thank you. I'm glad you find that.
Yeah, I think at the end you mentioned a food like called dory.